And here's where we might be able to like introduce Illich as well. Is it a convivial tool?
Yeah.
Is it a tool that promotes conviviality?
Yeah. What's a good convivial definition? That's always such a
that was the fun
Or
one
the
to actually
holistic
work
versus
on.
production.
Yeah,
We
I
could do
mean,
that
if we
too.
wanted to stick with that, we can talk about more like is it a holistic technology versus a prescriptive technology. But what I like about using the idea of Ivan Illich's concept of tools for conviviality is that it's this idea that essentially it's a tool that will promote human flourishing. It's a tool that will help us build a better human community, build a better network of human relationships.
Yeah. Tell me, what is the one thing about Facebook that is most conducive to conviviality, to a lively life together? And then let's talk about also, what is one thing that's the most destructive of that common life, the most isolating or alienating?
Well, I would say the most convivial aspect is what's on the tin. If you look at, when you first log into Facebook, it says a place for connecting with friends or something like that. And so, yeah, it is a tool for me to connect to friends who aren't sitting in my physical presence.
Yeah.
Now, of course, connecting with people who aren't in your physical presence is part of the problem with that too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. What's the most convivial connecting you've done on Facebook? So I think about, you could name everything that it does as connecting, and we use the term so broadly. What's the best form of it?
I think the best form is if you have some shared experience with somebody and you take pictures and then you go home or from your phone you upload the pictures and then you can sort of continue that experience a little bit or comment about, oh, remember this day at the beach and wasn't this a great hike we had? Something like that.
I would even add to that too. I think you can even extend that into the past a little bit. So a great example of this is I love the fact that I can be connected to extended family members. I have an uncle who does a fair degree of keeping track of family history and stuff. So there's been a few times where he has shared pictures of family members from generations past, and it allows us to talk about family history and get information that when we're not having a family reunion every year, we would otherwise not get. So for us, it's become a really important way of communicating about and unpacking family history, which I think is phenomenal. I think there's that. There's two other convivial uses I find for Facebook. One is the use of specific groups to learn a specific thing. Okay. So in my case, some of the things I like to do is I'm always wanting to learn how to use the internet better. And so in my case, it's building websites on my own, blogging, writing online. And so I'm part of a group on Facebook who does that. And so I can source that group when I have a question about what's a best practice. And so, bam, I've got it.
And that could either be getting skills, new skills, or becoming aware of certain aspects.
Yes, it's a great way to do research on things I'm trying to find out about, too.
Or connecting with like-minded people about something.
Yeah. Now, that's where the caution lies, though, and that's where it can start to work against you in I guess, non-convivial sense, unconvivial sense, where you start to reinforce what Eli Pariser has called the filter bubble, right? Is where you only join the groups that are like-minded, that people agree with you. So it is a two-edged sword about that you have to pay close attention to, is that on the one hand it can be quite convivial when there's a specific purpose, but when we're trying to find groups that we're trying to feel, I don't know, like overly safe in, or we're trying to wall ourselves off, then we might be running into a bit of a problem.
Part of the point is, what is my engagement with the rest of the world like, and how does that connect to Facebook? Because I think if I am a minimal user of Facebook, I only go on for affinity groups, I think that's fine as long as my engagement relationally offline is rich and diverse, and I'm not just seeking people just like me.
Right.
And I think, oh yeah, go for it. But if my primary community is found on Facebook, there's a problem anyways. But along with that, there's your concern there about the filter bubble. Like that's where a lot of my relationships coming.
And I think for a lot of people who never go into groups, but their primary action with Facebook is through their news feed, and that news feed is governed by an algorithm that has been demonstrated to build filter bubbles for people. That's where it really becomes a problem, because now most people aren't even aware of that happening, and so they don't even have a choice in it, and that's where it becomes very much a machine, and they're just a cog in the wheel.
And that's what I would say to answer the other part of your question would be the most detrimental part of Facebook is the news feed. which
Wow,
by
yeah.
definition is an algorithm deciding what to show you rather than you being intentional about deciding who you want to see. I'm logging onto Facebook to see pictures of this friend, and read news stories about this thing. But that's not how people use Facebook. They log in and see what's there and see what Facebook has decided to put in front of you.
Do we know, I mean, this gets a little more practical now instead of just kind of like theoretical and abstract, but do we know if there are any practical workarounds for even turning? I think there is. I feel like I've heard them mention like you can turn it off or something.
Yeah, instead of looking at your news feed, just use the search bar at the top and search for individual friends that you want to connect with or learn about and go see what they're doing. Yeah. But that's a hard...
The workarounds are great. I left Facebook about 5 years ago, and for about 6 weeks following, many times a day, I found myself doing this, which is open a new tab, hit F, and it would bring up Facebook because I went, and then return.
Yeah.
So I would go to Facebook's page, even though I deactivated my account, and it was that inscribed into my body. And
wow.
So on the one hand, when you're talking technology, people say, well, hey, we're not technological determinists. We don't think that somehow technology has this agency over against us. That's true, but I think the bigger worry is that we're far too optimistic about our powers of agency and autonomy vis-a-vis technology. Because I think I'm a pretty mature guy. I think I've got pretty good self-control, but things were happening within me. I don't want to say just to me, because I was doing them, but they were so tacit. And so the fact that every single time I went on Facebook, within seconds, I would be yearning for someone else's life and more discontent, which is, from what I hear, a very common experience. I think that's not the kind of thing I can just exert self-control and say, Matt, be more content.
Yeah, more self-control is not the answer. It's designing the systems differently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or in my case, I mean, in one sense, I think it's a mark against my character, but I had to leave because I couldn't handle it.
Well, that's you designing your systems.
Well, that's a good
differently.
point. Yeah,
so you're designing your use of technology, and I think that, again, it's the idea of intentionality is really important. I wish that we could somehow build in our own algorithms or our own processes into social media tools. Like I wish I could write something that would tell Facebook what I want to see and that it would follow me. That'd be hard to do.
Do you think people would actually do that?
No. I think I might try, but...
Yeah, I'm sure you guys would do it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you got to remember, too, that Facebook has a community of what? 1 billion plus now?
Yeah.
So the majority might not.
Yeah.
But
here's the thing, though. What if there were plugins that people could make and it would do it for you? Because that happened on Facebook, on MySpace.
And WordPress.
Yeah, remember MySpace? Yeah. MySpace, it was an error in MySpace that let people bling out their thing. They left it in there. And then you didn't have to be a programmer, but you had to know somebody who could put whatever. So I wish that kind of thing were more open on Facebook. But of course they're not. They don't have any incentive to do that because their incentive is to maximize the advertising revenue.
Right.
So until we change the incentive, I don't know if.
I think you hit on a key point there, because when we look at some software companies or groups that do have or have had thriving plug-in communities like WordPress, those are open source programs, and Facebook is not. So it's kind of you're up against those limitations, and if we want to transition out, we can at this point to talking about this concept of built spaces, whether in the public or physical space or in the digital space. There is this idea of a built space, and that creates a certain type of environment. And this is where I kind of bring in some of the literature that I work with and engage with in political science. There's the emerging field of behavioral economics, which kind of takes the ideas of economics, the ideas of what we know of human psychology and behavior, puts them together and seeks to find ways to, there's really nice ways to talk about it. They talk about how do we nudge people in certain directions.
How do we control people in a way that feels nice?
Yeah, exactly. That's totally what it is. How can we, how do we, I don't know, like what are those things they have in the Matrix? How do we build a better cocoon for our batteries? I don't know, whatever. But there's this idea of how do we nudge people certain ways, and I think that probably sounds a little too nefarious, but some of that is coming from this place of trying to provide people what these people think they want, and that informs the built space online in the case of something like Facebook, because these new social media companies have grown up at the same time that this field has grown up, and so they have worked and married these two fields together, and so they really do interact quite a bit, and that informs the built space. of the online world. I mean, obviously there's the internet, which is a built environment, but there's subunits of that, like Facebook or Google. Like, how do you see the broad parameters of those built spaces first, and how do you see that affecting online behavior?
So yeah, I would say that just like architecture can have a profound effect on the way that people interact with the building and with each other in real life, I would say that the same kind of profound effect happens based on the default values of the way that the social media tools that we're using are designed from the defaults. Because what we've found is that people just don't change the defaults very often. So the privacy setting defaults, the default, exactly. Those types of things people just don't set. And you mentioned earlier behavioral economics. The classic example is a way to get people to save more money is to put it in the default of your paycheck that a certain amount goes into your savings, and as you get a raise, a certain new amount goes there. Part of what I would like to call people to do is to not live according to the defaults, to break out of that and live more intentionally.
Even just to examine what the defaults are. I think part of this week that I'm coming away from is simply coming to explicit awareness of how some of these things works is it can be transformative, because you at least see that there's other options out there, that you don't have to do it this way. You can change the privacy settings on something. I mean, just simply being aware of that.